I spent years writing code that made other people rich, and now I run my own company, and for the last few years, I've been coaching developers through the exact same path. And what I figured out is that the developers who break out are almost never the best engineers in the room, because I've watched pretty average engineers build real businesses, while genuinely brilliant ones stay stuck at a senior or an executive level for over a decade. And it really comes down to 4 things, and none of them are technical. Number 1, and nobody wants to hear this, is that your income as a software engineer is capped directly by exactly how much bullshit you are willing to tolerate. And I mean that literally rather as some motivational thing. Because here's what nobody tells you about having a job. Your job is pretty much a filtration system, and it's an incredibly good one at that. Somebody in sales is gonna eat the client who screams on the phone. Somebody in finance is going to chase the invoice that is still 90 days late. And you get to sit with your IDE. Sure, you're gonna have to debug some bugs, you're gonna have to work on actual fulfillment, as well as on a sprint deadline. But you're gonna have your headphones in, music playing, and you're gonna be able to solve interesting problems all day long. And that's the actual deal that you signed on for. And it's not that terrible of a deal as much as people wanna make it out to be, because what you did was trade your upside for insulation. The second you start a business, every bit of that insulation all of a sudden disappears, and all of it lands on your desk at once. You might have a prospect take 3 calls with you, tell you he's ready to move forward, and then vanish off the face of the earth. You're gonna have to chase down somebody for a mere $11,000 while your own rent is due the next week. And you're going to look stupid in front of many people over and over again in a way that you haven't really had to since maybe you were in your teens. And a perfect example of this is Tufik from Courtesy on my startup accelerator. Ended up landing his first client, extremely excited, and what ended up happening is the client ended up running out of money to be able to pay him. Thus, he had to leave the work half unfinished and take whatever money that he was able to get from him. And here's a pattern that I've watched play out hundreds of times. A developer almost never quits because the work was too hard for them. Because the work is actually never too hard for a software engineer, because software engineers are absurdly good at hard things. They usually quit because the bullshit hit a level that they were not willing to pay anymore. And they tell themselves a much more comfortable story about it. Something like, maybe the market wasn't really there, or the timing was off, or they're gonna try again next time. So here's the framework, and I call it the bullshit tax. Every revenue level has a price tag on it, and that price isn't paid in hours, it's specifically paid in one specific flavor of pain that you have to be willing to absorb. So 0 to the first $10,000 a month costs you rejection and pretty much a genuinely stupid amount of it. $10,000 to $50,000 a month costs you client management, which means scope creep and saying uncomfortable things directly to people who are currently paying you. And past $50,000 a month costs you people problems, which means you are suddenly responsible for other human beings and their mortgages and their mistakes. So go write down the last 5 things in your business that made you seriously think about quitting and sort them into these 3 specific buckets. Because whichever bucket that you've actually been quietly avoiding is going to be exactly where your revenue stops. And at the end of the day, almost nobody is capped by their skill. They're going to be capped by the one category of pain that they have decided they're above it and have been avoiding it. Which takes me directly into trait number 2, which is actually courage. And I have to be specific because I don't necessarily only mean quitting your job on a Monday with no plan type of courage. That's not courage for most people, that's recklessness. What I mean is fully committing instead of keeping one foot in the boat, which is what almost every single software engineer I talk to is actually doing, whether they'd like to admit it out loud or not. So here's what that hedging kind of looks like, and see how much of this is going to apply to your situation. Let's say you're going to work on the business side of things in the evenings, except the evenings are whatever's left after a 9-hour workday, dinner, your kids, your family. So it's really only about 40 minutes of tired work that you're doing where you're not even being that productive. You haven't told anybody at work, and you haven't told even most of your friends that you're on this path, because if this doesn't work out, then nobody ever has to know it happened. And in a sense, since you're not putting in 100% of your effort, back of your mind, you don't think it's going to work out 100%. And every time it gets genuinely uncomfortable, which is usually the exact moment you have to talk to a stranger about money or try to acquire a client, you're going to retreat into the one thing that you're already great at, which is building. And you tell yourself that the product needs to be a bit more polished, need to build a better product before you actually start selling it. And that last one is really the one that kills most software engineers' businesses, because your comfort zone was never really your job. Your comfort zone specifically is your IDE. It's the one place on earth where you feel completely competent, and business is going to drag you out of it and stick you into rooms where you are essentially the dumbest person there. At least that's what you'll think of yourself. And every instinct that you're gonna have is going to scream at you to go home and to open up your IDE and start building something. Perfect example of this is Sandra, who when she first joined Code to CEO, she said she never sees herself selling. All she wants to do is code. And fast forward 6 months later, she starts saying that she does not want to code anymore. She wants nothing to do with the fulfillment side of things. She only wants to continue selling. So here's how you measure this honestly. And I call it the 3 anchors, because commitment isn't going to be a feeling for you. It's actually 3 things you can physically point at. The first is going to be money. Ask whether you've put your own money at risk. And I don't mean, let's say, $10 domain. I mean a specific number that would legitimately annoy you if you were to lose it. The second is going to be your calendar. So ask whether this gets the first block of your day, or are you giving it whatever leftovers at the end of the night. And the third is going to be your identity. Meaning, have you told people out loud with your name attached what you are actually building, what path you are going on? Because the second that you say it out loud, all of a sudden quitting starts carrying a social cost to it. And that cost does an enormous amount of work for you, whether you enjoy it or not. So you're gonna have to shed your identity as well to completely change who you are. So score each one out of 10 and add them up. If you get above, I would say 24, then you're committed and you're gonna be fine. If you get 16 to 23, you're hedging, and hedging is gonna feel like the safe option, but it's the most expensive thing you'll actually be able to do, because you're gonna pay almost all of the effort and collect none of the return. And if you're below 16 here, I'll just say this with love, what you've got is a hobby wearing a business costume. You shouldn't even be spending any time on it. Now, before we get to trait number 3, I have a newsletter specifically for software engineers who are trying to get out of the 9-to-5 rat race and actually become entrepreneurs, specifically for ones who believes their skills are worth a lot more than they're being paid. The link's in the description below. Go ahead and sign up. It takes you about 10 seconds at most. You'll be able to receive daily newsletters that will help you get to where you want to get to. Now, the third trait is all about consistency. And the way this usually gets taught is honestly garbage. Because consistency is not discipline, and developers are not lazy. So we can retire that entire conversation. If you were lazy and you were not consistent, you wouldn't be a software engineer in the first place. You're the guy who taught himself 3 languages on weekends for no reason other than you thought it was interesting. You're the guy that went on to do so many different side projects because you just found them interesting to do. What you've actually got is a scoping problem, and it's the same one you destroy a junior engineer for in sprint planning. Let's say it's Sunday night, you're full of coffee and optimism, and you write out your plan. You post every single day, 2 hours of outreach every single morning, landing page ships on Friday, content calendar is set up and is mapped out for the whole entire quarter. And then Thursday, there's a production incident, and you miss a day. And Friday, you miss a day again, because the streak is already broken. So what's really the point anymore? And by the following week, the plan is completely dead, and you've quietly decided that you're not just a consistent person, which once again isn't true at all. You estimated that ticket like a junior, wildly optimistic with 0 buffer and no degraded mode whatsoever. So I want you to think about it the way you would actually think about a service you actually own. Because at the end of the day, you already know deep down how this entire thing works. You don't get 99% uptime out of one heroic deploy on a Tuesday afternoon. You're gonna get it out of a boring process that runs on a consistent timeline, whether anybody feels like it or not. And a system that degrades gracefully instead of failing over the first time something goes sideways. So you need to go out and build yourself basically a personal SLA. You pick one action, and I mean exactly one to get started off with, and it needs to be the one that actually generates revenue. In other words, it needs to be the highest ROI action, which for nearly all of you in this stage is going to be talking to potential customers rather than building anything. Then you're going to define 3 tiers. Your full rep is a great day, so let's assume for many of you this could be 10 personalized outreach messages. Your half rep is a messy day where everything was on fire. So let's say you get to do about only 5. And your floor rep, which is the lowest absolute you would do, is genuinely your worst day, which is at least one message, and that's going to take you about 2 minutes to send out. And the only rule that matters is that you never, ever, ever miss the floor. So have a floor defined, but never miss it. Whether you're sick, traveling, hungover, you have a deadline from hell, it does not matter. You still send that one message. Because the floor was never about the output. One message a day is obviously not building anybody a business. The floor is about your identity, because it means that you never get to say the words, "Oh, I stopped." And that sentence is genuinely what kills a lot of software engineers in their businesses. It was never the missed day that did the damage. It's a story that you tell yourself the morning after the missed day, because that justifies missing future days. And last but not least, the fourth trait is going to be asymmetric leverage. And this is the one that actually separates people. Your salary is going to be the most symmetric thing that you will ever own, because it's 1 hour in and 1 hour paid, and you cannot break that ratio. And since you don't get paid overtime, oftentimes your 1 hour in is going to be worth significantly less. So you can raise that rate, you can job hop, you can grind your way to staff, and all of that helps, sure, but the shape never actually changes. It's still a straight line, and every single straight line has a ceiling built into it. And the reason you're watching this video in the first place is that you can already kind of see yours. Asymmetry is when effort and payoff stop being proportional to one another. So a small input has a real shot at producing an enormous output for you. And that's really the only thing that ever gets anybody out. And here's exactly where we as software engineers screw this one up. Because we developers understand asymmetry instinctively, which is precisely why we sprint straight at the most obvious asymmetric bet on the menu, which is literally building a software. So we can build it once, we can sell it infinitely, we can sleep while our strike notifications keep coming in, and we collect our dollars. Except you're only looking at one side of that equation, because the upside is asymmetric, but so is the actual downside. If you spend 8 months building it, you launch it, and absolutely nobody buys from you. The market basically says, we don't want this. You get 0 users. You now have no idea whether the product itself was bad, or the market itself was wrong, or maybe your pricing was wrong, or maybe the offer was wrong. What do you have to change specifically? Because you spent 8 months of your life to buy exactly one data point that doesn't even tell you anything useful, you ended up failing asymmetrically. And essentially, this is obviously being done by software engineers time and time again. Perfect example of this. Paul, one of our top founders inside Code to CEO, spent countless months building out software to try to get it out. But of course, none of them were actually successful. So instead of building it and selling, ended up changing it to sell before you build, and made more money in January and February of 2026 than he did in the previous year at his 9 to 5. So in order to actually go about this properly, we have to give what I call an asymmetry score. And there's 3 dimensions to this, 10 points each. So the cost to be wrong, meaning what you lose if this fails completely. The speed to signal, meaning how fast you find out whether you're right. And of course, the ceiling, meaning how big this gets if it works. You assign whatever thing you're doing, you add up all the points, 1 through 10, right? And above 24, you have a green light, go. 16 to 23, you don't kill the idea, but you shrink it until it's cheaper or faster to be wrong. And below 16, you walk away no matter how much you love that current idea. And of course, it's going to be applicable to a SaaS, or it can be applicable to another potential venture that you're thinking of. But essentially, run everything through it. So let's take a look at a specific SaaS, let's say. Cost to be wrong is a 2, speed to signal is a 2, and ceiling is a 9, which could be a good hit. But this is 13 points, which is we walk away from it. And that is exactly why a plethora of software engineers are sitting on a graveyard of genuinely beautiful products that not one human being is ever going to use. But now, let's say you run a particular service business through it, where you're solving one very specific expensive problem for one specific type of person. The cost to be wrong is going to be an 8 because you find out inside a handful of conversations. The speed to signal is going to be a 9 because people are either going to say yes to you and hand you their money, or they're going to say no, not interested, and walk away from it. And they'll even tell you why they're walking away from it. And the ceiling is going to be obviously lower than a SaaS, so you're going to be sitting at around a 6, 7, or an 8 because services productize, and you can, down the line, build software later once the customers have told you precisely what to build. So all in all, you're sitting at close to 25 points. So now you have a green light to go. And here's the part that's going to sting for most people. And I'm just going to say it plainly. The reason other people are making money off of ideas that you had first isn't necessarily that they're smarter than you, it's that they saw distribution first and built second. So you didn't necessarily build the wrong thing, you just built the right thing for the wrong customer. And you found out way too late to do anything about it. So at the end of the day, you get paid before you build, and everything else is secondary to that statement. So those are the 4 traits that I have seen over the last few years, not only in myself, but also in other software engineers who were able to get monstrous amounts of success. How much bullshit you're willing to tolerate, whether you're actually committed or you're still quietly hedging, whether you've got a floor you never miss instead of a plan that dies on day, let's say 10, and whether you're scoring your bets honestly instead of hoping that they work out. If you do these 4 things, you will genuinely outperform 99% of developers across the world. And the reason is almost embarrassing when you say it out loud. It's because those exact 99% of developers are putting everything they have into the one variable that's already been commoditized, which is how good they are at writing code. But all 4 of these traits are exactly how you execute. And now one of them tells you what to execute on. And that's the actual wall that most of you are going to be hitting right now. It's not going to be effort, it's not going to be courage. It's not that you can't identify a problem worth solving that somebody will pay for. But most often than not, the real hardest part of this entire thing for you is going to be placing a roadmap on everything to get started with. So if you're interested in that roadmap, go ahead and send in your application to code2co.com. The first link in the description below, completely for free. That's where I personally work with developers inside my Startup Accelerator Code2CO to actually give them not only the roadmap, but guide them through the entire journey. Keep in mind it is application only, and if you're not accepted, at the very least, you will still get feedback on where to go from there. As always, thank you so much for watching and have a good rest of your day.